Michael took a slow sip of his whiskey, his attention fixed on the animated discussion his friends were having. They were at their regular hangout spot, a cozy restaurant they all loved, and tonight's topic of discussion was about finding the right life partner. Oliver, with a hint of emotion, set his glass down with a thought and began. In the beginning, women can be so charming and attentive, but as soon as they feel they've got your commitment, it's like a switch flips. His perspective was perhaps tinted by recent events. His fiancée had broken things off with him just a few weeks earlier, mainly over his insistence on a prenuptial agreement. Andrew, a perpetual bachelor who had dated a variety of women, jumped into the conversation. It's rare to find women these days who are both stunning and genuinely good-hearted. He went on with a touch of exasperation. It feels like the choice is between a gorgeous woman who's mainly after wealth or a wonderful, intelligent woman who might not fit society's typical beauty standards. It's like there's no middle ground. Throughout the lively discussion, Oliver seemed a bit distant, frequently glancing out of the window, lost in thought. The other two exchanged banter and laughter, almost forgetting Michael's silent presence. When the laughter faded, both realized Michael hadn't participated in their banter. They exchanged knowing glances. Mike's just the kind who'll probably have a different take than us, Oliver commented to Andrew, slightly smiling. Upon hearing his name, there was a brief flash of recognition in Michael's eyes, but he chose to remain silent, gazing into the distance. Oliver tilted his head slightly and teased, "What's on your mind? Speak up, Michael." Feigning confusion, Michael turned to them. "What are you guys on about?" he asked, though deep down he knew exactly what had triggered their discussion. He took a deep breath, trying to avoid diving into the debate, but soon realized he couldn't dodge it any longer. "I just don't get it. Why do you believe that someone can't be both beautiful and genuine, without being materialistic? Maybe you're just not looking in the right places, or perhaps attracting people who don't resonate with what you truly value. There's a whole world of amazing women out there." His friends chuckled, a smirk playing on their lips. "Oh, really now, Romeo?" one teased. Michael leaned forward, his voice firm. "Why is it every time you guys bring up women, it's always in a negative light? Are you seriously suggesting that every attractive woman has a wicked side?" His friends exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of amusement and defiance. Michael understood that their past experiences, especially failed relationships, had shaped their beliefs. Their truths, tinted by past pain, might not easily be swayed. As the conversation continued, Oliver suddenly proposed. "How about a wager, Michael? Find a woman who is beautiful, kind, and intelligent within 3 months, someone who isn't chasing your wealth, and I'll hand over the keys to my Mustang." Michael's eyes went wide, taken aback by the unexpected challenge. "Why escalate things, Oliver?" he inquired. Oliver leaned back, a sly grin forming. "I know how much you've always coveted that car. Let's see if you can prove us wrong." Michael had always been envious of Oliver's classic Mustang, a vintage beauty. He had once offered a sum so generous that it could comfortably support someone for years. Yet despite Oliver hardly ever taking the car out for a spin, he had consistently refused to sell. Now, with Oliver's sudden proposition, Michael couldn't tell if it was a genuine offer or just the effects of whiskey-induced bravado. Would Oliver truly hand over the keys if Michael succeeded? "Are you for real with this bet?" Michael queried, looking for any sign of jest in Oliver's eyes. "Dead serious," Oliver confirmed with a nod. Michael paused, contemplating the challenge before replying confidently. "All right then. I hope you keep the Mustang polished for me. When I commit to something, I see it through." Oliver leaned forward with a sly grin. "Once we shake on this, there's no backing out. You're aware of that, right?" Michael nodded, curious about Oliver's insistence. It soon became clear that Oliver had more specific terms in mind for their bet. As they signaled the waiter for another round of whiskey, Oliver began detailing the conditions. Firstly, the woman Michael wooed must genuinely agree to marry him. Secondly, Michael couldn't flaunt or use his considerable wealth to woo her. In fact, she had to believe he was broke, drowning in debts. Michael furrowed his brows, thinking over the terms. It seemed the night's drinks had inspired quite the challenging scenario. Yet as he considered the stakes, a mischievous glint appeared in his eyes, signaling that he was ready to embrace the daring endeavor. Michael firmly believed in genuine human connections, ones that transcended material wealth. This wasn't just blind optimism, it was rooted in a personal story very close to his heart, the love story of his parents. Not many in town knew the tale of how Michael's parents, Julia and Kurt, had met. Julia, a hard-working woman, spent most of her life in a food processing plant. Her simple background would be the last place one would expect her to cross paths with someone like Kurt, a man with no home to call his own. On a particularly memorable evening, Julia found herself waiting at a park bench. She had been stood up by her date, and she sat there, occasionally glancing at the clock tower ahead, hoping he'd eventually show. An hour had passed when a scruffy-looking man with wild hair and an unkempt beard took a seat beside her. In his hand, he clutched a briefcase, which seemed out of place considering his disheveled appearance. Ignoring the towering clock right in front of them, the man turned to Julia and innocently asked, "Excuse me, do you have the time?" Julia chuckled, finding his question endearingly odd. She couldn't help but notice that beneath the dirt and grime, the man had the warmest brown eyes she had ever seen. Those eyes twinkled with a hint of mischief and humor. As the two conversed, Julia learned that the man's name was Kurt. The briefcase, she discovered later, held the few possessions he deemed essential, a sleeping bag and a collection of empty beer cans. In the midst of their conversation, when Julia inquired why he had chosen to sit next to her, Kurt's answer was simple yet heartfelt. "You looked so lovely, yet so alone. I thought maybe I could bring a smile to your face." And that evening, amidst laughter and stories, a beautiful love story began. Kurt's journey to homelessness wasn't one of recklessness but a series of unfortunate events. Initially setting out on a backpacking adventure, a string of misfortunes left him penniless. His idle days soon became filled with alcohol, which quickly spiraled into a way of life for him. Fate intervened the day Julia's date stood her up. She saw it as a sign, believing their meeting on the bench was meant to be. Since she still had the dinner reservation for two, she decided to invite Kurt. Despite their contrasting worlds, they shared an enchanting evening filled with laughter and shared stories. As they ambled toward Julia's residence after dinner, she felt an overwhelming urge to embrace and possibly kiss him. However, the stark reality of Kurt's living situation became evident from the strong odor emanating from him. Sensing her slight recoil, Kurt quickly promised to meet her at the same spot the next morning. Determined to make a better impression, Kurt managed to find a place to clean up that night. He reached out to some old friends who provided him with fresh attire. The next day, he arrived at their meeting spot, holding a bouquet of flowers, looking like a new man. Their whirlwind romance eventually resulted in the birth of their son Michael 2 years later. Julia's unconditional love and support helped Kurt find his footing again. Remarkably, within a decade, Kurt transformed his life, becoming one of the leading chefs at a prestigious restaurant in the state. For Michael, his parents' story was the epitome of genuine love, a testament to the fact that true feelings could exist beyond materialistic allure. After his spirited discussion with friends, Michael arrived home with a newfound resolve. The very next day, he began strategizing about how he'd go about finding a woman who would be interested in him for who he was, rather than his wealth. He made a list of potential places and strategies. The most obvious choice in the modern age would be to dive into the world of online dating. But to Michael, virtual communication lacked the spark and authenticity of face-to-face interactions. He yearned for genuine exchanges, the kind where he could read expressions and gauge the authenticity of laughter. So he decided to take a casual stroll through town. The vibrant storefronts illuminated his path, each one telling its own story. As he ambled past a yoga studio, a sign caught his attention: Yoga for Women. Michael chuckled to himself, imagining joining a class just to meet someone. His stroll led him to another sign, this one announcing a beauty pageant. An idea clicked. The pageant would not only be an entertaining event, but it would also be brimming with talented and beautiful women from his town and its surroundings. While the main event would showcase physical beauty, The fact that these women made it to such a competition indicated a certain level of intelligence and grit. As he pondered the idea, Michael thought that, sure, everyone couldn't win the crown, but those not taking home a title might be open to new adventures or opportunities in town. It felt like the perfect setting to meet someone, understand their aspirations, and possibly strike a genuine connection. Michael was wholeheartedly committed to the challenge, going to great lengths to alter his lifestyle. He exchanged his comfortable living quarters for a humble mobile home, signaling his modest means. To further drive home his altered socioeconomic status, he acquired a dilapidated Ford Taurus, marveling at how such a car was still functional. As the beauty pageant neared, Michael spent 3 days fine-tuning his plan. Though he had never before graced such an event, he was taken aback by the pageant's grandeur and elegance. Michael's next destination was a local thrift store, where he hoped to find attire befitting his new persona. The store was a maze of mismatched garments, each priced astonishingly low. Michael picked out oversized, faded clothing, ensuring he exuded an image of someone facing financial hardships. When the day of the pageant arrived, Michael maneuvered his rickety Taurus into a parking spot outside the grand concert hall. Even though he had purchased his ticket while in his usual upscale attire, he felt an undercurrent of anxiety about how he'd be perceived in his new getup. The concert hall's entrance was relatively deserted as Michael walked in. The event had already commenced, as evidenced by the faint sounds emanating from the main auditorium. The only other soul in the vicinity was a janitor, engrossed in her task of mopping the floors, her headphones playing a tune that Michael recognized. Drawn by curiosity, he edged closer, realizing she was humming a French song. What caught his attention, though, was not the tune, but her impeccable French accent, which seemed flawless and authentic. "Excuse me?" Michael started, hoping to strike conversation. The woman, taken by surprise, spun around to face him, her striking violet eyes fixing him with an inquisitive look. Removing her headphones, she tilted her head slightly, awaiting his next words. For a moment, Michael was at a loss. She was strikingly beautiful. Despite the drab janitor's uniform, her graceful frame, lustrous hair, and elegant neck were evident. A thought flashed across his mind. She could easily be a contender in the pageant, not just cleaning up after it. Recovering his composure, he joked, "Missed the prelims, did we?" She looked taken aback for a second, then laughed. "The pageant? Nah, it's not my scene." "Really? I thought all girls dreamt of winning beauty pageants," Michael said, a hint of teasing in his voice. Her laughter filled the air again. "Honestly, all I'm dreaming of right now is finishing up here and catching the last bus home." Seizing the moment, Michael offered, "How about I give you a ride instead?" Immediately, he wished he had his usual flashy car to impress her. She raised an eyebrow, looking him up and down. "Weren't you here for the pageant?" Michael waved dismissively, a broad smile on his face. "Somehow, I feel like I've already seen the most captivating participant." The indirect compliment seemed to catch her off guard, making her cheeks turn a light shade of pink. "I'll be waiting outside by the corner, whenever you're ready," he said, hoping she'd accept. Most women would certainly prioritize their safety when approached by a stranger, but this girl was no stranger to advances from men. Often, her sharp wit was enough to deter them, so she tried the same approach with Michael. "I'm not one for surprise adventures, but thanks for the offer," she said. Michael was taken aback, but her clever response made him smile. While part of him wanted to respect her boundaries and leave her be, another part was intrigued. After all, he was on this quest, and her wit was a refreshing challenge. He took a few steps toward the exit, then paused, turning back to her. "You know, they say adventures are better when shared." She gave a nonchalant shake of her head and went back to her mopping. Recognizing the clear signal, Michael decided it was best not to push further. He left the building, heading to the modest car he had recently acquired. Slipping into the driver's seat, he turned the ignition key, yet he found himself hesitating. Something about her had captivated him. "She never looked past my eyes," he mused. Since he began his charade in his thrifted attire, he had noticed the change in how people perceived him. Some gave sidelong glances, while others deliberately avoided his path. It was eye-opening how quick people were to judge based on appearances. Yet she had seen past the facade, looking straight into his eyes without preconceived notions. That thought stuck with him. Her name was Vicky. Roughly 20 minutes after Michael settled into his car, he emerged from the concert hall. From his vantage point around the corner, Michael's heart raced, debating if he should approach her or simply drive away. He certainly didn't want to seem like he was stalking her. Vicky looked around briefly and then ventured across the street before circling back. When she finally noticed Michael sitting in his car, she strolled over and playfully remarked, "Did you expect me to circle the entire block to find you?" With an elated grin, Michael quickly got out of the car, opening the door for her. As she settled in, she looked around the car's worn interior. A Ford Taurus, she mused. "This takes me back. My grandma had one of these, and I have so many memories of road trips in it." Feeling a tinge of pride, Michael replied, "Yep, she's my trusty steed." As they started to drive, Vicky's curiosity got the better of her. "So, what do you do?" she asked. Michael simply pointed to himself with a grin, attempting to reference his current appearance. Vicky gave a puzzled look. "I didn't quite catch that." Clearing his throat, Michael explained, "I'm going through a rough patch right now. My attire and this car, they sort of reflect that." Vicky gave a half smile. "Another guy who feels down on his luck," she silently mused. However, regretting her initial assumption, she quickly added, "Life has its peaks and valleys. Your current situation? It's just a chapter. It doesn't define you. It's simply part of your journey." Caught off guard by her insightful response, Michael had expected a different reaction. Yet Vicky's perspective was refreshing. To her, he wasn't just a man down on his luck, but someone capable of rising above his challenges with the right attitude. Vicky had always believed that excessive sympathy didn't truly help people in their struggles. This conviction stemmed from her personal life experiences. Growing up, Vicky lived with her grandmother Joyce, a resilient woman who was later diagnosed with Alzheimer's. However, the journey to this diagnosis was fraught with misunderstandings and tensions. It began subtly. Joyce would forget little things, like the name of the family dog or the dates important events took place. As her memory lapses became more frequent and severe, she sometimes went silent, struggling to recall basic facts or even hold a conversation. Most distressingly, objects around the house would go missing, like Lori's prized jewelry. Lori, Vicky's mother, would find it easy to blame Joyce, believing that she was merely feigning forgetfulness. Joyce was Vicky's paternal grandmother. Lori, not understanding the depth of Joyce's condition, became increasingly frustrated with her. The tensions reached a point where Lori convinced her husband Mark that Joyce needed a different living arrangement. One day, while Vicky was in college, she received a call from her distraught father. He hesitantly informed her of the decision to move Joyce out of their home. Vicky was taken aback. "Dad, are you serious? This was Mom's idea, wasn't it?" Mark's silence was enough of an answer. He had always been swayed by Lori's decisions and found it difficult to stand up against her wishes. "Dad, Grandma isn't just being difficult. She's genuinely forgetting things," Vicky pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. "She needs medical attention, not isolation." Mark sighed heavily, torn between his wife and his mother. His interactions with Joyce had been increasingly strained as he struggled to understand her unpredictable mood swings. Unable to convince her father about the urgency of Joyce's condition, Vicky felt a heavy weight on her shoulders. That night, she made the life-changing decision to leave college to care for her grandmother. Vicky had a special bond with her grandma Joyce. Memories of their time together often took Vicky back to those warm summers in Grandma Joyce's charming cottage by the lake. With its wide picket fence and a garden filled with flowers of every hue, it was a picture of idyllic beauty. However, the cottage was no longer in their possession. Her parents had sold it years ago. As a child, Vicky's world had been upended when her parents decided to separate. It was during this turbulent period that she was sent to stay with Grandma Joyce. The cottage became more than just a home. It was Vicky's sanctuary, shielding her from the whirlwind of emotions she felt due to the divorce. Their mornings would begin with the enticing smell of blueberry muffins that Grandma Joyce loved to bake. After their hearty breakfast, they would amble down to the lake. Here, under the watchful eyes of her grandmother, Vicky learned the art of fishing. But it was their evening storytelling sessions that Vicky cherished the most. With every tale, Grandma Joyce would weave in lessons, drawing from her own experiences or age-old fables that imparted wisdom. One of the most enduring lessons Vicky learned was from an analogy Grandma Joyce often made. "Life is much like this lake," she gestured towards the placid waters. "There are calm days and stormy nights, but even after the fiercest storm, tranquility returns, just like in our lives." In a twist of fate, it was Grandma Joyce who played the mediator during Vicky's parents' separation. She convinced her son Mark to reunite with Lori, seeing that she needed support. When the two reconciled and remarried, they chose to sell the beloved cottage to buy a larger home that could accommodate the entire family. Fast forward to the present. It had been 3 years since Vicky made the heart-wrenching decision to leave college. Now, she and Grandma Joyce shared a simple apartment. Caring for her grandmother was a full-time commitment, making it hard for Vicky to hold down a regular job. Often, she would dash out for errands and then hurry back, always ensuring her grandmother wasn't alone for long. Caring for Grandma Joyce was a challenging task. The irony wasn't lost on Vicky. The very hands that once cared for her as a child were now the ones she tenderly looked after. There were days when Joyce couldn't even recognize her, which was heartbreaking for Vicky. Yet she understood that this forgetfulness was a cruel facet of Alzheimer's. Vicky had grown resilient, managing her grandmother's occasional hallucinations and bouts of disorientation. Fortunately, the medical diagnosis and subsequent treatments provided some relief from Joyce's symptoms. But these daily challenges were a part of Vicky's life that she kept private. The night Michael drove her home, she offered only a glimpse into her world, mentioning her life with her grandmother and little else. As they were about to part ways, Michael, clearly smitten, asked if they could meet again. Vicky hesitated briefly before agreeing. That night, thoughts of Vicky danced in Michael's mind, making sleep elusive. A few days later, he mustered the courage to call and invited her to a movie. Vicky agreed, but to his disappointment, she canceled at the last moment. The pattern continued with the next few dates, deepening the mystery surrounding her. Determined to understand more, Michael decided on a surprise visit. He stopped by a florist and picked out 2 bouquets, one for Vicky and one as a gesture for her grandmother. As he approached Vicky's home and knocked, he heard her voice from inside, suggesting it wasn't a good time. Growing increasingly concerned, he persisted, offering help. After some time, the door finally opened to reveal a surprised Vicky. She looked at Michael, who now appeared vastly different from the man she first met. Gone was the unkempt appearance. Now he stood before her, clean-shaven and neatly dressed. Her gaze dropped to the flowers in his hands, and despite everything, she smiled. Upon entering Vicky's apartment, Michael quickly understood the challenges she faced. The living room was filled with pictures of Vicky's family and signs of her grandma's daily life. Vicky, seeing Michael's interest, offered him a drink and began to share her story. Michael listened, deeply moved. To him, Vicky was nothing short of a hero. She had given up her education and dreams to care for her grandmother. This explained why their dates had always been canceled. Over time, Michael found himself spending more and more hours with Vicky. Vicky's apartment in the neighborhood had replaced the typical dating venues of cinemas and restaurants. Her dedication and strength drew him in, and he began to assist with Joyce's care. Slowly, Michael's circle narrowed, focusing solely on Vicky and her grandmother. His evenings, once filled with friends, were now joyfully dedicated to the two of them. One day, in a moment of spontaneous affection, Vicky leaned over and gave Michael a quick kiss on the cheek, catching him so off guard he almost fell out of his chair. To Michael, Vicky was extraordinary. Every day, he grew more captivated by her, thinking that girls like Vicky were a rare find. One afternoon, about a month later, Michael was lounging in Vicky's apartment while she made a quick run to the drugstore. She had asked Michael to stay and watch over her grandma during her short absence. As he sat back, munching on a slice of pizza and flicking through the TV channels, his phone buzzed with a call from his friend Oliver. Balancing his pizza in one hand, he answered the call on speakerphone. "Mike, what's up? Too busy chasing girls to hang out anymore? Oliver's voice teased from the other end. Mike laughed. Oh, you've no idea. Speaking of which, maybe get that Mustang ready. Really now? So, who's the lucky lady? Oliver replied, intrigued. She's incredible, Ollie. I've never met anyone quite like her, Michael responded, genuine admiration in his voice. Unbeknownst to Michael, the front door had quietly opened. Vicky stood in the hallway, overhearing the conversation. Oliver chuckled. So, has she said yes to the big question yet? Michael sighed. We're not at that stage yet. If she hasn't agreed to marry you, then forget the Mustang. You know the bet's conditions, Oliver reminded. Michael paused, searching for words. It's not that straightforward. By now, Vicky had pieced together what was being discussed. She stepped into the living room, her face betraying her feelings. Caught off guard, Michael quickly hung up, without even saying goodbye to Oliver. Vicky, I didn't hear you come in. Please let me explain, he began, but she raised a hand to stop him. What year is the Mustang? She asked, her voice shaking. The realization that Michael might have been playing a game hurt more than she could express. Michael took a deep breath. I wanted to tell you eventually. It's not what it looks like. So, after winning your bet, you just discard me? Vicky's eyes were filling with tears. No, Vicky. Honestly, that car means nothing. Yes, it began as a silly bet, but everything changed when I got to know you, Michael implored. But Vicky wasn't on the mood to listen. Deeply hurt, she opened the door, signaling for him to leave. Michael tried to reason with her, but she was inconsolable. With a tearful and firm request, she asked him to leave her alone. A few days later, Michael found himself back in his restaurant, managing some affairs. After overseeing some operations, he took a moment to sit and gather his thoughts. The weight of recent events rested heavily on his shoulders. As he was lost in thought, his boisterous friends made their entrance, laughing loudly. Spotting Michael, they began to tease, suggesting that he'd lost his mojo ever since falling for a certain someone. Michael's patience wore thin, and Oliver's relentless mocking pushed him over the edge. Why the hell did you call me that day? You ruined everything, Michael yelled, frustration evident in his eyes. Taken aback, Oliver started with a retort, but soon noticed the genuine pain in Michael's expression. Realizing the gravity of Michael's feelings for Vicky, Oliver softened. I'm sorry, Mike. He began, genuine remorse in his voice. Is there anything I can do? Michael shot back bitterly. You've done more than enough already. Despite Michael's numerous attempts to reach out to Vicky, she shut him out completely. She didn't answer his calls or replies to his texts. The silence between them grew longer, and eventually, Michael resigned to the reality that she might never speak to him again. One morning, as Michael was sipping his coffee at the restaurant, commotion at the entrance caught his attention. A pair of teenagers were negotiating with a waiter holding a poster. Curious, Michael approached to see what it was about. Reading the poster, his heart sank. It was a missing person poster for Joyce, Vicky's beloved grandmother. She had been unaccounted for since the previous evening. Vicky had stepped out briefly to pick up some groceries, not thinking anything amiss. In her absence, however, Grandma Joyce, in a moment of confusion, grabbed the car keys from the stand and drove away. Without a second thought, Michael sprang into action. He quickly took a photo of the missing person poster and sent it to all his contacts, enlisting their help. For the next day, Michael, along with his friends, scoured the area for any signs of Joyce. Among his friends was Jacob, who owned a bloodhound known for its tracking skills. To everyone's surprise, it was Oliver who called Michael almost 12 hours later. He had stumbled upon Joyce's car abandoned in a nearby wooded area. Without wasting any time, Michael, Jacob, and the police rushed to the scene. Jacob's bloodhound, after a brief sniff around the car, darted further into the woods. After what felt like an eternity, they found Joyce. She was seated on an old, moss-covered log, cold and disoriented. Her eyes darted around, trying to make sense of her surroundings. Upon seeing Michael and Jacob, her anxiety was palpable, bombarding them with questions about who they were and where she was. Without hesitation, Michael removed his sweater and wrapped it around the frail, elderly woman. He tried to call Vicky to inform her, but she declined the call. so he sent a text letting her know they had found Joyce and were on their way back. Upon arriving, Vicky rushed out, tears streaming down her face, to embrace her grandmother. She gently took Joyce's hand and led her inside, the weight of relief evident in her steps. Oliver lingered outside, his head bowed, guilt visible on his face, not just for the recent discovery, but for the rift he had inadvertently caused between Michael and Vicky. Oliver hesitated, then finally asked Michael, "So, are we good to go now?" Michael paused for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I guess." For several days, Michael waited, hoping for some form of communication from Vicky. He wasn't expecting a grand gesture or for her to come rushing back to him. Just a simple acknowledgement or a thank you would mean a lot. About a week later, as Michael was lounging at home on a quiet Sunday morning, his phone rang. It was Oliver, urging him to come to his restaurant right away. Puzzled and concerned, Michael quickly dressed and headed over. Usually, the restaurant didn't open until 11 a.m. on Sundays, but when Michael approached, he could see activity inside. He entered, only to be met by a chorus of joyful shouts and a rain of colorful confetti. His friends were all there, shouting "Happy Birthday!" With everything that had happened recently, Michael had completely forgotten about his own birthday. As the celebrations continued, a roaring sound caught everyone's attention. A gleaming red Mustang slowly pulled up in front of the restaurant, its engine purring smoothly before going silent. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped Oliver with a wide grin on his face. Tossing the car keys to a dumbstruck Michael, Oliver announced, "You've earned it. The Mustang's all yours." Michael stared, first at the keys in his hand, then at the car. As memories of the bet surfaced, a familiar face emerged from the crowd. It was Vicky, wearing a playful smirk. "I figured you wanted this car more than you wanted me," she teased. The room erupted in laughter, lightening the mood and bringing smiles to everyone's faces. On the day Joyce was discovered, Oliver had taken upon himself to reach out to Vicky. He felt it was his duty, as Michael's best friend, to provide some clarity. "Vicky," Oliver began when she picked up the phone, "I know right now you have every reason to be mad at Michael, but there's a bit more to the story you should know." Vicky, still upset, responded hesitantly, "All right, Oliver, I'm listening." Taking a deep breath, Oliver explained, "Look, that whole bet thing wasn't to play with your feelings. Michael, well, he had become a bit of a hermit. He was drowning in work and hardly ever took a break. We all, his close friends, were worried about him. We just wanted him to get out there, maybe meet someone special, experience life a bit." Vicky, intrigued yet skeptical, asked, "So you made a bet for him to find love?" "In a way," Oliver chuckled, "though it sounds ridiculous when you put it like that. The car, the Mustang, that was just a motivation for him. But trust me, Michael never saw it as a prize for winning your heart. He genuinely fell for you." Pausing for a moment, Vicky softly asked, "But why the Mustang? Why not just a push or a pep talk?" Oliver replied, The Mustang. See, Michael has done a lot for my family and me over the years, a lot more than I can ever express. That car was going to be my way of thanking him. I had planned it to give it to him for his birthday long before this bet even came into play. It just became a convenient prop for our silly challenge." Vicky felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, understanding. "Thank you, Oliver, for being honest with me," she finally said. "Vicky, all I want is for Michael to be happy, and I genuinely believe that's with you," Oliver confessed. Michael's eyes met Vicky's, still somewhat shocked by the surprise, yet a warm, appreciative smile gradually broke through. Though the lustrous red Mustang symbolized an element of their past misunderstandings, Vicky's presence hinted at forgiveness and a chance for a new beginning. "But I do hope you wanted me a little more," she said softly, moving closer to him. Michael, placing the keys on a nearby table, enveloped her in a tight embrace. A year of healing and rebuilding passed since that moment. Michael and Vicky, with fresh starts and understanding hearts, began to weave a tapestry of love and care around Grandma Joyce, ensuring her days were filled with joy and serenity. The time they spent together, though sometimes challenging due to Joyce's worsening condition, was nonetheless a tapestry of precious moments, laughter, and shared stories. Eventually, they decided to cement their love officially. With Joyce as the guest of honor, Michael and Vicky exchanged vows under a delicate archway of blossoming vines. Their union was not just a merger of two hearts, but of a deeply connected, small family that had learned to navigate the rocky terrains of life together. For several blissful years, their love story unfolded seamlessly. Though their moments of happiness were punctuated with the somber reality of Grandma Joyce's aging and the progress of her disease, they faced each day with hope, choosing to focus on creating beautiful memories for her remaining days. When the inevitable day came and Grandma Joyce passed away peacefully in her sleep, Michael and Vicky mourned, but also celebrated the beautiful, strong woman who had played such a pivotal role in their lives. A month later, amidst their grieving, a new spark of joy ignited in their lives. Vicky, cradling her swelling belly, whispered to Michael, "We're gonna be parents." 9 months later, with tears of joy gleaming in their eyes,